So they said we could just leave it blank. They said you could leave it blank and we'll fill it in for you. No one will know. But I would know, is what my mother said. So I was 5 and we were about 6 years into a revolution in Iran. And if you wanted rights and privileges as a human under the auspices of the new Islamic Republic of Iran, you were probably going to be presented with a form by the government in front of your colleagues or your classmates at some point that would ask you a question, and there was only one correct answer anymore, and the prisons were full of people who had answered with the wrong answer. So that form was now in front of my parents, and so we had to leave. And that was something that was a bit impossible as well. So we took everything we had and walked into the Sistan-Baluchistan desert, which is this unregulated place between Iran and Pakistan, full of people who are specialists at moving impossible things between lines, like French chocolate or American DVDs or people. And my father explained we had to be very quiet during the day because if you upset the smugglers, they might leave us behind. My grandfather was also with us, and he was experienced with this place in between. He had been a storyteller in Russia in pubs kind of like this. He would tell stories to people halfway between a day at work and an evening at home with a pile of bills. He would tell them funny stories about cows and how come you can really own their milk. Stalin didn't like storytellers that reminded people that they didn't own anything. So after 7 years in a gulag, he bought a new identity and a new birthday, and he went to Iran, and he met my grandmother, and they had my mother. My father had a variation of this kind of a story as well. His father had left Syria under the first Assad when he started handing out forms with one correct answer for them. His Georgian wife, who was the daughter of 2 separatist activists who was also not welcome in the USSR, both fled to Iran and had my father. And my 2 impossible parents had their 2 impossible children, and off we went into the desert. For 2 weeks, we walked at night. We eventually made it to Pakistan and then to India and then to the UK under the British Commonwealth program for asylum seekers. In Heathrow Airport, we were given a form with 2 more choices. We could choose South Africa or Canada. Canada at the time was famously divided over what its legal language was, English or French. South Africa was decidedly famous at the time for trying to decide what its legal people were. So we chose Canada. We arrived in a city called Victoria, named after the Empress Queen Victoria. Victoria is the English garden capital of the world. They serve high tea at 4 p.m. in every restaurant and cafe. And as new immigrants, we would have to choose between the English or French language school system. My mother explained that the British, and with the help of the Americans, overthrew Iran's first and only democratically elected government. So right there in the city named for the imperialist English queen, we wrote French. So there we were, people who had never become Iranian, were not yet Canadian. I learned French at school and English from the neighbor's television, and I listened to my grandfather's stories about impossible cows at night and Farsi at home, until it came time for the citizenship ceremony. So we went down, my sister and I dressed in matching ice blue velvet dresses my mother had made, and we stood side by side next to all the other impossible people. People who had been born Kurdish in places you were supposed to be Sunni, or had been born Hmong in places you had to be born Chinese, or who had been born Croat in places you needed to be Bosnian. And they had all been people who had an impossible answer for a form. And at the end of the ceremony, you have to stand up and go to the judge and get pinned with a maple leaf. But my grandfather couldn't. At this point, he had made the impossible journey from a Siberian gulag to a desert in the Middle East, and now he was near the ocean in the Pacific. So he couldn't walk the last 8 feet to go and be pinned with some semblance of being counted somewhere. So the judge got up and left his desk, and he came down to the floor and met us in the middle of the room, which I've come to realize is where we all find our way through impossible situations. We will fill out 1,000 forms with 1,000 empty spaces, and we will have to answer for things that we won't feel like are possible choices. Man, woman, prefer not to say, visitor, citizen, stateless, Iranian, Canadian, but where are you really from? And they're all going to be answers we have to tick off or circle or find somewhere in a drop-down menu that doesn't drop down far enough. But in the end, all that really matters is that we will be forced to answer a blank space, and if we leave it for someone else to do for us, probably no one will know, but you'll know.